Xi Jinping is definitely a realist, and he is preparing for a large-scale military assault against the island, and it will be surprising because if they do it, they don't want to give us warning. So you have to be prepared, and we have to be prepared. We need to be incredibly hard-minded. And what I see from Taiwan's leadership, there was another article in the Wall Street Journal that reflected discussions with senior Taiwan leadership. Same kind of point of view is, my response, and a lot of Americans, what planet are they living on in Taiwan? There is a country with 1.4 billion people that is run by a ruthless communist dictator who has a death wish for you. And you're telling me that we should prioritize Ukraine? Well, I guess these people aren't very serious. The problem is that the United States is not what it was in 1999, economically, militarily. 30 to 40% of our attack submarines, which are absolutely essential for a defense of Taiwan.
It's obvious that Xi Jinping is positioning his chess pieces in preparation for war. He's directed his military to be prepared to take Taiwan by 2027, and folks, that's only 2 years away. Now, it's true that does not mean that he will invade in 2027, and it's also true that it's not predetermined. But it should be very concerning to all of us that he's given his military that direction.
U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes. As the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats, European allies must lead from the front.
I agree China is the pacing threat. And the best way we want to prevent a war. Day one of a war with China and Taiwan is a day too late. They need sea mines now. They need Harpoon missiles, air and missile defense, things like that. I asked the previous secretary under the previous administration, what are you doing about it? He says, well, I'm studying it. He's the secretary. I just asked for you all's review and figure out who's behind, do we got to kick to start getting these weapons to Taiwan faster so we have deterrence? And I just appreciate your comment to that.
I'll defer to the chairman as well, but this is not something we're simply reviewing. It's something we are implementing in real time. I think there was a lot of talk about a shift to the Indo-Pacific in previous administrations, but the department had not put in place, not just, there was strategy changes at some level, but driving change into the institution to make decisions, prioritize, and trade-offs in your budget, in force posture, in training and exercises, in where you forward position troops and munitions. Those are the things we're actioning in real time, and I think very differently than in the past, with a realistic view of what threats could emerge in the Indo-Pacific. I defer to the chairman.
The People's Republic of China has embarked on a dangerous course and are on a dangerous course. Their aggressive maneuver around Taiwan right now are not exercises, as they call them. They are rehearsals. They are rehearsals for the forced unification of Taiwan to the mainland.
In the meantime, the Chinese are going to try to exhaust the Taiwan military. They're going to attempt to show Taiwan through a form of psychological warfare that resistance is futile, that China can demonstrate an ability to cordon off Taiwan. There will be no maritime Poland. In the case of Ukraine, it has land, it has corridors that it can be resupplied. They want to show that Taiwan will not have the equivalent of a Poland. And they are demonstrating their resolve and their strength to be able to use military force if necessary, which they think will affect the capitals of Tokyo and Manila and Washington. And so there are a lot of reasons why they do this, not the least of which revolves around reducing indications and warning. If you're able to successfully crowd in and around where you intend to do a military operation, then you can achieve surprise so much more easily. So they're building through a lot of these operations a numbing effect, which then would allow them to reduce warning and more quickly do an operation of any sort. At the same time, it's wartime familiarization. All these units, they want the PLA, the Coast Guard, everybody else to be, more in tune with what the sea, airspace, environment, looks like, feels like, so they can be more proficient if they have to take orders by Xi Jinping.
And General Kane, your testimony warns that the PLA's exercise around Taiwan are not just pressure campaigns, but rehearsal for forced unification. Throughout my visits to our regional partners in the Indo-PACOM region over the last few years, you can feel that there has been a rising tide of recognition that China is a threat on their doorstep and ours. As the United States and the world has awoken to the increasingly adversarial actions of China, can you expand upon how the DoD is right-sizing our force structure to prepare for a conflict in the Pacific should our adversaries continue to escalate tensions in the region? And what are we doing now, not years from now, to ensure we can stop that move if it comes?
Yes, sir. Well, first, I share your, I share your views and those of Admiral Paparo related to what certainly appears like increasing rehearsals by the PLA in and around the Pacific. The administration and the Secretary in particular, through our interim national defense guidance and strategy, which I won't get into in this forum, but is clear around the need for the department to focus on the Pacific and to scale our combat capability with systems, capabilities, and effects that would prevent Xi from advancing his narrative and create, frankly, multiple simultaneous dilemmas in their decision making. And so we continue to work diligently on that through the services, as you talked about, and it's something that I'm keenly focused on with my global integrator role.
Okay, thank you.
To Taiwan very briefly, I would agree, and you talked about it earlier, it's the KMT, and it is the KMT, by the way. They control the legislature. It's different from the president's party. They're playing a dangerous game on their defense budget. And we all, if anyone from Taiwan is watching this hearing, they need to be, they need to realize they're playing a dangerous game, okay? Cutting defense spending right now is not the right signal. We all agree with that.
Taiwan, to me, one of the critical questions is how much is Taiwan committed to its own defense? It's disturbing to me that in recent months, the Parliament of Taiwan has moved to cut their defense budget. And how are we to be expected to think about sending Americans into harm's way on behalf of a entity that doesn't seem all that interested in protecting itself? Are you disturbed by that move in the Taiwanese Parliament?
I'm profoundly disturbed, Senator, and I think the question that you're raising is one that I've heard not only Democrats but Republicans raise often in private. Secretary Mattis, who was mentioned earlier, said we can't care more about your defense than you can. So this is where I think I've been trying in my communication and my recommendations for policy vis-a-vis Taiwan to try to induce them in whatever way possible to become, say, more like South Korea. So it's a very plausible model with a much more serious military, because not only do I don't think it's fair to Americans to ask Americans and our servicemen and women to suffer at great if our allies are not pulling their weight, but also that it won't even be viable.
We are witnessing the unprecedented buildup and modernization of China's military. They're building ships at an alarming rate, and their defensive capabilities continue to expand. What more can be done with sufficient Navy resources to deter or fend off an attack on Taiwan by the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, I'll start, sir, and yield to the Secretary. You know, we've been studying this in the Navy for a long time. We have a global series of war games we conduct at Newport at the Navy War College, and we have very experienced commanders like Admiral Paparo and Admiral Kaler, who their responsibility is to work this. There are 5 areas we are focused on in the Navy: long-range fires, counter C5 ISRT, which is being able to counter the Chinese ability to track us, terminal defense of our ships, because we've got to be able to defend them, and contested logistics. The last area is this area called non-traditional sea denial, and that came out of study and thought from Admiral Paparo when he was the Pac Fleet commander, that we needed to make Taiwan a very difficult target to take. So we're investing in those. We're experimenting in those. I was, several weeks ago, I was out in San Diego with Admiral Kaler and Admiral Paparo as they were working some of these technologies together to deliver them at pace. So I think the Navy views ourselves as a central point for Admiral Paparo, who is the combatant commander responsible for this, to prevent that from happening, and we are focused on it.
Well, I want to thank you because indeed it's peace through strength and protect the people of Taiwan. And then hopefully the Chinese Communist Party see the unintended consequence, of my view, of failures by war criminal Putin, which is strengthen NATO. Who would imagine with Finland and Sweden now being members? But aside from that, Germany going to 5%. So truly the Communist Party needs to see that an invasion of Taiwan would be catastrophic. And then General
Admiral Kilby, if you were defending the Taiwan Strait, what would you rather have, one aircraft carrier or $13 billion worth of unmanned systems?
It's a hard question to answer without qualifying questions, but if I could put those drones on Taiwan, I'd put them on Taiwan.
I'm good. I'm glad to hear that. Many admirals have not answered that question the same way, but I'll tell you, every junior officer that I've asked this question of, and I ask this question a lot, has said what you just did, which is we'd rather take that $13 billion aircraft carrier money and put it towards unmanned systems.
I did have a qualifier, though.
I get it. We don't have time for all the qualifiers. But General...
正当国家全力打造无人机国家队时，立法院却出现绊脚石。国民党立委提案要将中科院无人机产业园区7625万预算全数删除，引发全国到地方的不满，抨击是弱化国防。
Taiwan, an area of the world which, in fact, might be the one that could seriously bring U.S., China, others to blows. So why is this an issue? Well, because Xi Jinping made it an issue, right? If you look back in 1972 when Nixon talked to Mao Zedong and the issue of Taiwan came up, Mao Zedong said, that can wait. It can be 100 years. We'll eventually come back to it, but it could be, we don't want to make that issue something that changes the nature of the geopolitics now. Xi Jinping has a different course. The course that he set out is to say, we need to solve Taiwan, otherwise we have no rejuvenation by 2049. So he's put a timetable to it, right, in terms of it must be solved. You have no dream realized if this is still a problem and Taiwan is not assimilated politically differently than today into China. And he's been preparing his military for options there to be able to do so. So Xi Jinping, very hard over on every sovereignty issue. We've seen that's in his blood. And the PLA has been ramping up for many years now, and it's, if anything, only accelerated in terms of the investments in every warfare area, the training, the practicing for what we see there. Very destabilizing overall. The Chinese are also worried about the Taiwan sense of their own identity. If you poll in Taiwan, many of the population there would say, you know what, I don't feel like I'm a mainland Chinese person displaced in Taiwan, or that I want to go back to the mainland. I feel like I am, in my heart of hearts, Taiwanese, and I enjoy the democracy and the freedoms that I have today. And if you're Taiwan, there's been a deep concern about what China's ambitions may be, because they can't trust when China brings this formula called the one country, two systems. That was their formula. One country, China, two different systems. For a time, right, people were thinking perhaps this is the way that you might find some middle ground here. And Hong Kong was sort of the test case, right? They turned over Hong Kong, the Brits did in 1997. Hong Kong was supposed to have 50 years of autonomy, and that suddenly ended, didn't it, right? So the Chinese got impatient. They wanted to have more control over Hong Kong a lot earlier. The Chinese approach to Hong Kong was to decide how their chief executive was going to be chosen, and then did other things that eventually created some instability there, because people rightly took a look and said, they're changing, they're beginning to extinguish the freedoms that we've known, and they rose up in the umbrella revolution and in other ways that you saw And the Chinese then said, hey, there's just instability there, we'll crush it. And they cracked down, and that democracy essentially has been extinguished for all intents and purposes. It's there in name only. If you're Taiwan and you take a look and go, oh, I'm being offered this one country, two systems formula too, it means nothing, right? If you see Hong Kong and where the Chinese decided to go with Hong Kong. So if you're in Taiwan, you'd say, if I actually politically unite with this regime, I know what's coming, right? And it will be not my own system, it'll be an assimilation essentially into the Borg. So the Chinese are sensing this too, and so they think that perhaps time may not be on their side. The other issue at hand is, this driving some of these issues is whether or not Xi Jinping believes that because he's over-leveraged so many countries around the world economically, that he can get them to essentially stand pat, be mute, not participate in sanctions, or essentially do nothing if he goes. And that's part of the calculation. So anyway, for the near term, you've heard a lot about the 2027 date. The Chinese, Xi Jinping set that out to say, get ready by. It's not an iron countdown to 2027, as far as we know. But essentially is, I want the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, to be ready to do anything I ask them to do with regard to Taiwan, no matter how hard it is, no matter if it's taking over Taiwan with an invasion, and no matter if it also involves U.S. intervention, you need to be able to handle it, PLA. And he's doing everything in his power to drive that PLA to be ready for that kind of event, right? And in doing so, creating a huge amount of disruption, a huge amount of anxiety, a huge amount of instability in the Western Pacific, right? So today, you're already seeing the coercion tactics. The Chinese would love to be able to not go to war and simply have Taipei conform and start talks to politically reunify. That is the gamut that you see with increased activity all around Taiwan. Some of it is punishment to Taiwan. It's punishment on Taiwan to demonstrate a signal to the United States that the trend of Taiwan thinking about, more than just de facto independence, has to be arrested and is a form of warning that's coming through military forces. Because if you're Chinese, your diplomacy, your informational activities, your economic activities didn't change the nature of where things are headed now, right? The Chinese think there's a slippery slope that's moving away from them, and they have to arrest that negative trend. And so that's the reason why they're using what's left to them, which is military force, using more overt military means to then go after Taiwan. Savvy? So the question is, if those don't work, and Xi Jinping is pressuring, is it going to be something more violent later on? And this is the huge question mark which all the Indo-Pacific is very concerned about.
The broader question really concerns the famous Taiwan issue. And I think the way I'll frame it, you may not want to respond this way, but of course, people all have their favorite date by when we need to be ready for the most acute moment of threat when China might attack Taiwan. And 2027 tends to be everybody's favorite year because that's when Xi Jinping has told his military he wants them to have a capability to either invade or blockade or what have you. I wonder how you think about the time horizon issue when you're looking at the Taiwan security matter, and whether there's a moment that concerns you more than another. Is the moment of maximum danger sooner, or is it later? And how is it even useful to think in those terms? Because of course you got to be ready every day.
Yeah, and the closer we get to 2027, the less relevant the date becomes. Yeah. So in 2020, 2021 or so, when we first heard it come out in open source, when the date was pushed up from 2035, it seemed very alarming, because it was closer up. It was an acceleration by 8 years of the previous time, but it's now 2 years away, and so the closer we get to it, the less relevant it seems to us. And it was always a difference between the prospect of a war of necessity, that prior to a date of declaring a readiness to change conditions with force, it might have been a war of necessity, and that is the 2005 PRC anti-secession law And that's under three conditions: if there was a declaration of independence, if number two, if the PRC were to see unification, or if the PRC were to see a third power intervene on Taiwan's behalf, or number three, if the PRC were to derive that unification was irrevocably beyond its reach via any other means. Those would be, any one of those, a condition under which, by its own declared law, it would determine that it must execute a war of necessity. And those would be a condition, a casus belli, if you like. Then beyond the point at which it would declare itself ready, it would have an ability to execute a war of choice. That, you know, it was never a sell-by date. Right. It was never a date where the PRC had declared, we're going on this date. And I think maybe they're somewhat confused when people conflate it with that. Accordingly, when it was a long time ago and it was declared an open source, I think it was a worthy benchmark to say, seeing this, we had better pay close attention to this. And accordingly, all the time, particularly for a commander that is in the field in command of forces who, in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, is charged with the responsibility of being ready, and that is the law that directs the Defense Department with being ready. My command, I am responsible for being ready every single day. It is, you know, being ready. But as you can see, the closer we get to it, the less relevant that date is, and the more we must be ready today, tomorrow, next month, next year, and onward.
Thank you. Back to Lynn.
That overall zoomed out picture, how do you assess the threat of China's increasing aggressiveness and coerciveness, and what timeline do you believe Xi Jinping is on?
The timelines have been has been an issue that is widely discussed among experts and governments. And we have all sorts of timelines. The shortest one, the most recent one, will probably be 2027, and nobody would guarantee that there will be something that happened by then. But there are others who may have a longer time frame for the possible happening of a conflict. But we can, as leaders, or we just cannot guess, and we have to get ourselves prepared. So we are, when we're facing with issue like this, we're using several timelines to make our preparation in stages. So this is what we're doing now, and we try to be as best prepared as possible.
So we'll talk about Taiwan preparations, we'll talk about American preparations, but I think it's also important to ask, when we're thinking about this overall assessment, this wide-angle lens right now, for you to explain how has the Taiwanese population shifted since Hong Kong and Ukraine?
Well, I think the Hong Kong situation, especially in the year, it was 2019, the event there has reminded the Taiwanese that, you know, we just cannot be too optimistic about people that may have an intention to take over Taiwan. So, and the Ukrainian case is another one, and it's another reminder to the Taiwanese people that we should get ourselves prepared. if we think that our democracy and freedom are something that we need to do things to protect. So I think, unfortunately or fortunately, the happening of these two events serves as a tiny reminder to the Taiwanese people that democracy of ours requires a lot of efforts by the society and people as a whole.
And it is the KMT, by the way. They control the legislature. It's different from the president's party. They're playing a dangerous game on their defense budget. And we all, if anyone from Taiwan is watching this hearing, they need to realize they're playing a dangerous game. Okay? Cutting defense spending right now is not the right signal. We all agree with that.
It's disturbing to me that in recent months, the Parliament of Taiwan has moved to cut their defense budget. Are you disturbed by that move in the Taiwanese Parliament?